So welcome everyone. Today is our weekly Wednesday workshop, and we have had an awesome time over these few months with various speakers, and we have an awesome person today as well. And so I'm Felicia Bell from the Gulf States Regional Office located in Jackson, Mississippi, and we welcome you today. Today we're going to be talking about soil. And the purpose of our workshops is to share what NCAT does. We have so many ag specialists and their expertise. And so these conversations we're having now is just opening it up so you can know what each ag specialist do in their particular region, their expertise. So our today's guest is Kroeger, and Kara is out of the Texas office, and that is the Southwest offices. Am I correct? I always mess that up. So we welcome
San Antonio.
Yes, we welcome you today, Kara, and thank you so much for your time and energy with joining us. And I will hand it over to you to introduce yourself. And if you can share with us, one, how did you get into agriculture? And then second, how did you come to NCAT?
Okay, sounds good. Well, Felicia, thank you very much for inviting me to be here. I am excited to hear what kind of questions people have. It's fun to be on a platform where you kind of let the audience guide it a little bit. It's also a little daunting, but I think I'm up for the challenge. So my background with regard to arriving to agriculture went a little backwards, really. And I started out first as an herbalist in training in Central America, and both in Central America and Colorado, learning rainforest herbs as well as Western herbs, and studied that for many years. Went to the Rocky Mountain School of Botanical Studies in Boulder, where we did a lot of materia medica, learning different plants, learning their uses, harvesting ethically, and making medicine that we provided in a clinic in the school. Then I went on to practice on my own, and I realized that I was giving a lot more nutrition advice than I was herbal advice. And so I wanted to study nutrition. So I went to a school called the American Health Science University to study holistic nutrition. And I got a certification in holistic nutrition and started practicing then. And I wanted to go the food route because I found that only so many people are going to take herbs, and I wanted to expand my clientele. And I love working with herbs, but not everybody has space for that in their life in order to do it the way that it needs to be done to truly be effective. So at that point, I began practicing as a nutritionist and worked in many different doctors' offices, holistic medical doctors' offices. I worked as an independent contractor for many of those. So I had, a day or two at each of their offices that I went in and saw clients, and was able to use my nutrition certification as well as my herbal certification in both of those jobs. And it was really fun. And of course, I was all along the way learning about food and our food system. Because as you study nutrition, you tend to learn those things. And I basically then decided that I wanted to add a little bit of a creative piece into my business, because consulting in an office all day was a lot. It was a lot to take on. Talking with people all day about their health is a beautiful thing, and it's also an intense thing. So I, at that point, started studying the culinary arts, and went to the local community college culinary school, realized real quickly that wasn't exactly the direction I wanted to head. I didn't really want to work in a restaurant. And so I hit up a local chef in Austin named Jesse Griffiths, and he has a restaurant called Dai Due. And I began working with him. And every single thing that he used came from a 150-mile radius, except for our salt. So it was incredibly learning what grew in the area and really focusing in on that. We also served a lot of game meat, and a lot of it was hunted by Jesse. And then we'd break down all those animals ourselves and make different things out of them and serve those as well. So we did a lot of butchery and nose to tail stuff, and it was awesome. And I just felt so lucky to be able to be using those kinds of ingredients And at that point, that led me to start doing some ranch dinners on one of my friends' ranches. I started putting on some of my own dinners. And then eventually I started living at her ranch because I loved being out there so much. And so she had a cattle operation, a small cattle operation in Uvalde, Texas, and she had learned holistic management kind of early on. And so she was teaching me that, and she was also a riparian expert. So we were learning a lot about waterways and riparian restoration and just ecosystem restoration on her land. And that was beautiful. And at that point, I made the decision that I wanted to go into agriculture. And so I went back to school and I got my degree in agriculture at Texas State. In 2014, I started, and I graduated in 2018. And another interesting connection was, before I even knew what NCAT was, I had learned about a project called Soil for Water. And Soil for Water is an NCAT project that we house in our Southwest office, and it is a initiative to help people who are in the grazing world learn how to catch and hold more rainwater in their soils and increase their soil organic matter, and learn how to graze more efficiently to restore ecosystem function. And so I was very excited about that, and I applied for the job at NCAT, knowing later that Soil for Water was a portion of the NCAT office. And I came into NCAT in October of 2018, so it's been almost 2 years, and I head up the Soil for Water initiative there now. And so I have learned a lot about soil health by way of just my work with NCAT overall, but particularly this Soil for Water project. And we have a great website, soilforwater.org, if y'all want to learn more about that. We're doing trials on 16 different ranches where we are looking at different regenerative grazing practices and monitoring them for 6 to 10 years, and we'll be slowly sharing that information with you of what we find. So my work at NCAT also includes helping to improve wholesale readiness with my colleague Robert. We have a couple different grants that we're helping a lot of farmers get their business wholesale ready so that they can start expanding into wholesale markets rather than just direct markets. And we also do a lot of work with cover cropping in our office, looking at cover crops for subtropical humid environments because they're different than what you need in other environments. So that's just a little bit about us and me and the work I'm doing with NCAT.
Wow, that's amazing. And that's why we're doing these workshops, because we get hired, we get our introduction to each other via email, but we really don't know each other's expertise. And so that was the reason why I was like, okay, we need to, one, learn each other's expertise, because we have our lists, our internal list of what we, do and what we share with our clients. But we're so busy. We don't get to talk to one another a lot. So that is amazing. I did not know you did all of that. And I'm just so elated because we're going to talk offline. It's some things that definitely people are doing here in our region that definitely could utilize your expertise of your basically your first life, your first career. So I appreciate you sharing that with us. That is so amazing. Thank you everyone that has joined us today. Our guest today is from our Southwest office located in San Antonio, Texas, Kara Kroeger, and we will be talking about soil today. And I only want to just tell everyone that have joined us recently that you can put questions in the chat and we will do our best to answer them, as well as if we cannot get to them, Kara will give her email address and then you can forward those questions to her to get answers. So let's get started, Kara. We can get started with the questions. So one of them is, what does regenerative agriculture mean? And then how does it improve soil microbiology and the health?
Okay, so first I kind of want to just talk about some of the agriculture practices of the past century. Unfortunately, with many of those practices, we kind of took a reductionist approach, and instead of we took some very complex interactions that happen in soil and plants, between soil and plants, and we oversimplified a very complex biological process, and we kind of minimized it, which distorted it, unfortunately. So we can use soil microbiology as an example of this, because 95% of life on Earth literally is below ground. It literally lives in the soil. And it is amazing to think about that. And all of a sudden, you know, prior to 1990, we weren't really looking at microbes in the soil with much significance in our main agricultural practice of the past, 100 years or so. So basically, with regenerative agriculture, we're starting to backtrack a little bit. And we're going back to some of the approaches that we were using prior to taking on a lot of the green revolution practices that we started doing in the 50s. We're going back, and regenerative agriculture is looking at how we actually put more back into the land than what we take. And so it's not just sustaining it, right? It's not sustainable agriculture, because in sustainable, you give and take at the same quantities. With regenerative agriculture, you're actually, putting more back in than what you're taking, and you're allowing these systems that naturally work together and naturally have a synergy that create plant health and soil health. We're allowing those to function in their natural form and do a lot more of the work for us, right? We've kind of started to do too much. We're doing too much when we can actually do less and get more out of it. And not only that, but the longevity of our soil is really important. And so with the kind of green ag movement, ag practices that we started doing, we started depleting our soils to the point where we can't keep using them if we keep practicing that way. So a lot of producers these days are starting to look at the significance of their production practices from a holistic viewpoint, and they're changing their perspectives a little bit, and they are starting to do things that these regenerative ag practices that lead to healthy soil, and they can produce high quality nutrient dense food, which we all need, especially in times like this where we need to keep our immunity up so that we can stay healthy. And we can also regenerate land in this form of agriculture. We can sink carbon with this type of agriculture and nitrogen, and we can have healthy communities and resilience in our economy and things of that sort. So it's a shift that is it is happening, and it's happening at a greater capacity than we've ever seen these shifts take place before. But we still need more people to get on the bandwagon and start looking at soil health, and particularly soil microbiology as one of the main components of soil health in order to create that resiliency and regeneration.
Wow, that's amazing. Now, I wanted to ask you, and I think this may have been a quote or I have seen it, that the soil that we have had for thousands and thousands of years, we're depleting it quicker. Is that correct now?
That's correct, yeah. And, a big portion of that just comes from the fact that we tilled up huge, massive amounts of land. When you till, you automatically release carbon into the atmosphere just because of the way that the soil breaks up and soil respiration and aeration and things like that. So we've lost massive amounts of humus or soil organic matter or soil carbon. There's a lot of different ways to call it. In the past, it was more called humus, and now it's being called soil organic matter. But yes, we have lost massive amounts of that because of our tillage practices. And what also happens with that tillage is we expose the soil, we expose all the microbiology in the soil, and we wind up killing off a lot of that microbiology as well. So particularly the fungal microbiology that resides in the soil. They operate in a kind of hyphae system, which is they spread out hyphae that then connects, and that's how they communicate and expand. They grow those hyphae and they search for nutrients coming from plant roots and then give their nutrients back to the plants in exchange for the sugar, the carbohydrate coming out of those roots. And so when we till, we wind up cutting those hyphae and digging that up, and we wind up with less fungal microbiology, but just less microbiology in general, because without living plant root in the ground, you can't feed those microbes, and so they will senesce until they are able to either have water again that then grows plants that then will feed them those carbon exudates that come out of the root system. So through tillage, through the loss of soil organic matter, and just kind of the loss of soil function by literally just breaking it apart, we've major areas of trouble.
And I'm assuming we're losing the organic matter with water as well, the runoff.
Yes, exactly. So when we are dealing with tillage, then the water comes down and we are going to erode a lot of that exposed soil, right? When we don't have roots holding that soil into the ground, and we don't have the upper part of the plant to act as a barrier when those raindrops come down, we get the fracturization of the soil even more so, because those raindrops hit really hard on a piece of soil and then can wash things away. What also happens in that scenario is we not only wash away soil, but we compact soil. So the rain will take that loose soil and begin to compact it, and you can get capping on your topsoil, which then prevents rain from entering down the line, but additionally it prevents plants from being able to seed properly. If that cap is too thick, they can't shoot down roots and shoot up sprouts. So we run into some major issues there too. So not to mention, I was talking about the riparian areas earlier, but when we have these exposed fields and this tilled dirt, all of that matter that is in those fields, especially if you're using NPK fertilizers and things of that sort, all of that's being carried in that water down into the waterways. And many of our areas have been demolished because we've either wanted to use marginalized land just to create yield, to try to create more profit, or maybe we let our cattle graze a riparian area. And for those of you who don't know, a riparian area is kind of the natural buffer that occurs around waterways. And so it's the things like here in Texas, we have cypress trees and willow, and you've got your wetlands, which might have your cattails in it and various things like that. But it holds banks in place, and it also will begin to absorb nutrients and pollutants that we don't want in our waterways. It prevents them, the riparian buffer will prevent those from going into the waterways and polluting waterways. So we can help water quality and water quantity through improved soil health practices too.
Wow, that's amazing. Can you share with us, so because we're tilling and we're really hurting ourselves, longevity, the long-term health of our soil, can you share with us some of the manners, and I'm gonna throw a few of them out here, that we could possibly not use tillage? So would some of those ways be utilizing a silage tarp, no-till methods? Could you share with us other things and then expound on those as well, of the different methods and techniques that we could utilize to not use tillage?
Yeah, absolutely. So every methodology that you choose to use is going to be determined by what it is that you're trying to produce, right? So it's going to be different for people who want to produce grass to feed livestock as opposed to people who want to farm, or people who want to have an orchard, or any of the three, right? So one of the best ways, I know that for some people it is very hard to, well, for one, it costs more money to buy a no-till drill, right? So if you could get a no-till drill and you can, transfer your production over into that manner, great. But not everybody can do that right off the bat. So if you're not in a position to do that and you're still going to till, the best thing to do is plant a cover crop. And you plant the cover crops in between your cash crop. Now, some people use cover crops as a cash crop as well. Some people have started taking the seed heads from their cover crop and then selling that as well, or at least using it for themselves the following year, so that they don't have to buy more seed as their cover crop. What most people find when they use a cover crop, if they are doing some type of fertilization, or synthetic fertilizer, or still using NPK, or even an organic NPK fertilizer, they find that when they plant cover crops, they don't need the same amount. So overall, you can reduce your cost. So even though you might spend more doing a cover crop, you may spend less on any other inputs you use because of the benefits that it gives the soil. So with cover crops, we cover, oh, did you have a question, Felicia?
No.
Okay. So with cover crops, we have a few different benefits, and I just want to right here put out the 5 soil health principles just as a reminder, because I think for anybody, absolutely, no matter what practice no matter what kind of production you're doing, orchards, pasture, farming, these 5 principles are really the best thing that you can do. One is to keep the soil covered. So cover crops will keep the soil covered when you're not having a cash crop in it, and that's going to prevent runoff. It's going to prevent temperature fluctuations. It's going to help with one of the other soil health principles, which is keeping live plant root in the ground, because those live plant roots are going to keep the soil microbiology fed. And even if you live in a cold climate, you're still keeping root in the ground that will help keep those microbes somewhat alive. Even though they kind of senesce in the winter, they'll still be fed by that. So keep the ground covered, keep continuous live root in the ground, minimize disturbance. So with cover crops, it can be a double-edged sword. You're going to maybe need to pass over the field again with some equipment to put the cover crop down, but at least you're minimizing disturbance that could come from a rain event. Here in Texas, we get torrential rains. I mean, we get 11 inches sometimes in a day, and so when you have that cover crop, it's going to prevent that runoff going. So that's where minimizing disturbance comes in from a rain event. The fourth one is you can integrate livestock, and that may or may not work for everybody, but if you have a system where you can integrate livestock, some farmers have decided, okay, we want to put our cover crop in the ground, and we also have some cattle. So we're going to put the cattle on that cover crop to terminate instead. And if you don't want to integrate livestock, that's okay too. But the ruminant gut is full of microbes. And so when you have those cattle go onto the land, they urinate. Their urine is very nitrogen rich, so it helps fertilize the soil. Their dung is full of all kinds of nutrients, but particularly nitrogen, as well as a lot of organic matter. So you get an increase in your soil organic matter that way. And then, not to mention their hooves, since they're, what is that called? Cloved? Oh, no, I'm losing the word. Anyway, it goes into the soil and it creates little divots where that moisture can begin to pool in the soil. And even if you don't get moisture, the small water cycle that occurs just from plants at night respirating can fill up those little divots, and then it goes into the soil and it helps keep that soil microbiology alive, because soil microbiology needs that water to survive. So last but not least, the 5th soil health principle, and I'll repeat these in a minute without all the other stuff in between, is to increase biodiversity. And so biodiversity is really important for the universe as a whole. We thrive when we have biodiversity. That's the way this big system is working. And so basically, below ground biodiversity, meaning bacteria, fungi, protozoa, predator-prey scenario down below the soil, and then above ground biodiversity, lots of different types of plants. So if you are doing cropping systems, can you rotate your crops? You know, how many different crops can you do? That helps create more diversity in the soil and above ground. And additionally, you get not only plant biodiversity, but you get your bird biodiversity and the insects and the beneficial insects that take care of the non-beneficial ones. A lot of times when we have biodiversity buffers in between our crops, say you have two fields, and if you plant some nice biodiverse buffers around your field, those plants will actually act as the host to the pests and not then take that from your crops. So I visited one farmer on Friday, and he actually grows his vegetables in with his Johnson grass, which is, kind of a somewhat invasive grass around here. But he's able to keep the grasshoppers off of his plant because he intermingles them. And so, it's looking at how we use the system as a whole altogether. And I'll just repeat those one more time. Keep the soil covered, increase biodiversity, minimize soil disturbance, integrate livestock, and continual live plant, live root in the ground.
Wow, that's amazing to hear the farmer, that he did. And that's one thing about farmers that I love, that we're innovative, creative, because you're only working with what you have. And so definitely even working with our limited resource farmers is, we have to do what is needed, but we have to do it within our budget. And so is being creative and being innovative. Two things that you mentioned that I wanted to bring back up a little bit. So for our farmers that do not want to integrate livestock, you could possibly utilize other livestock producers bringing their animals to your land. So they can terminate cover crop by just bringing their animals, day or two, temporary fencing, and then they're gone. And so think about that as well. Yes, definitely. And so I raise sheep, so I have done that, and I love doing that, especially when we have drought. I definitely want to utilize other farms to help out where I'm not spending money on buying hay. So definitely utilize other farmers in the area. And again, it creates a network too. You get to learn one another and what you're doing, and to the point that you start helping one another in the future. Second thing that you brought up was the no-till drill. So I wanted to share with our soil and water conservation districts around the country, some of them have no-till drills that you can rent. And so I just want to share that with everyone, that you may not have to purchase a no-till drill for your own personal use. You can just rent it and then utilize it for your job that particular season. But again, you would have to check with your soil and water conservation district of your area. And we definitely can help you find that information if you need it offline, but that is an avenue that you definitely can take. And wanted to ask, so I brought up the silage tarp. I know that a lot of our urban farmers / gardeners, depending on their size, and our market gardeners use the silage tarp. Can you share what your take is on that, utilizing that to kind of take out our grasses?
So kind of solarization,
yes,
in a sense?
Yes.
Yeah. So now also, would that be with use on top of a crop?
Yes, because sometimes I've seen it being utilized for that, but then also to start a garden versus tilling.
Yes.
So I've seen it both ways.
Right, right. So I think it really is dependent on your soil again. So one
Okay.
of the things I would take into consideration is compaction that already exists in your soil. Oftentimes when you have a really compacted soil, you know, you can still have a pretty heavy, dense bed of weeds sitting on the top, right? But if you put that plastic on top of things, in some ways, I think it's not good because you're then cutting off a lot of oxygenation. And I've seen some people's soils go anaerobic from that as
Oh, wow.
well.
Okay.
Some people will use a little bit of till disc or something like that. They'll hand pull out some of the other weeds and things, and then they'll do that. They don't have to do it for quite as long of a period of time. And you can kind of, I mean, it's better not to till if you can, but there's some scenarios where you're just trying to get the ground prepped, and then you can start putting some amendments on and getting some things that will open the soil up a little bit, through better calcium magnesium ratios, and getting those microbes awakened will automatically help open the soil up and help start forming aggregates that create porosity in the soil. So I think that it's hard to, as with any question in ag, it's hard to say, should I do this? Should I do that? And it's
Mhm.
really like, well, should you do it on your land? It worked for your neighbor. Is it going to work for you? Do you have the same soil structure going on? Is there the exact same thing happening? So, my preference would say, would there be a way to do that differently? But I think that there's just, we have one specialist in our office, Justin Duncan, and he has a video up on our, I think it's our YouTube channel, of doing some Bermuda grass removal. And so he did this really deep till, which kind of turns things over, and you pull out those roots and you really clean that out, but then you get things back in place and you start nourishing again. So does that answer your question?
Yes,
I
it
think
does.
that it can be a tool, and I think that it's just important to look at all the options that are out there. And one thing that I wouldn't do, though, is spray. I wouldn't spray chemical sprays in order to get a garden bed prepared. I would more, for myself, I would decide to manually remove something before I decided to use a spray, because the long-term effects of that spray can be more to deal with than the weeds that may come back up. But now, that being said, I will give one other piece of information. There's a woman, and she's an awesome soil microbiologist, just soil specialist, and her name is Nicole Masters. She's from New Zealand, and she has a really, really great book called For the Love of Soil. And it's one of my favorite books. It really kind of delves deeper into soil microbiology. So for those who've kind of hit a plateau with what they've learned about soil microbiology and they want to go a little further, her book's really, really good for that. But one of the suggestions that she has is, if you add fulvic acid into some of your sprays, what it does is, our soil does have the capacity to process and neutralize these chemicals. Like, you've probably heard about them putting bacteria in the ocean to help clean up oil spills and things like that, right? So
Yes.
that is the function of some of these microbes in our soil. And it's just that if we can reduce the amount of chemical we're using and add things that help that process of keeping the soil fed while you're doing that. So she puts fulvic acid, and I can't remember the ratios. It's in her book.
Mhm.
And if anybody wanted to know what they were, I can look them up and shoot them out in an email if y'all email me. But she puts the fulvic acid into the mixture of the chemical, and she may even put some molasses and different things in there that help keep the microbes fed. And it actually helps the chemical work better, but it also cuts how much chemical you're using quite significantly. So that's another thing. And then they've tested the soils to see whether those chemicals are still in there, you know, they've done comparison tests without
Yes.
fulvic acid and with it, and they've seen that it's quite helpful at helping the soil process those
Wow.
substances.
Wow, that's amazing. I want to let everyone know if you have any questions, you can drop them in the chat. And at this time, Kara, can you give me your email address? I will type it in.
Yeah, it is Kara, K-A-R-A-K, so Kara K at NCAT.org.
Okay. So I have placed that in the chat. Please copy that down. And if you have questions that you would like to ask and a little deeper questions, please forward those to Kara. And again, if you have any questions right now that you would like, just burning questions, you can drop those as well in the chat and we will get those answered to the best of our ability. So our next question is, how do the physical, chemical, and biological components of the soil work together to provide fertility to plants?
So basically, let's revisit what the soil is made up of, because that is those three different components, the biological, chemical, and
The physical?
and
Yeah, physical, chemical, and biological.
physical, thank you. I'm like, oh no, I just lost my train of thought. So our physical is our parent material, right? So our parent material is our clay, silt, and sand. And we need to remember that clay is the thing that binds our cations in our soil and provides a lot of nutrients. Our cation exchange capacity is determined by the amount of clay that we have in our soil. So if you live in a really sandy soil in comparison to a really clay-rich soil, the needs are going to be really, really different, right? So we've got that as the parent material. Another physical component is the organic matter. And so that's going to come from our plant residue, you know, going back into the earth and being recycled. It can also come from the manure from animals. We can add compost to our soils to increase organic matter. Then we have our soil microbiology, and that is going to be both below ground, but there's a lot of microbiology that actually exists on the physical leaves and stems of the plant too. And so the microbiology is going to help keep water in the soil, and that water can then feed the plants more nutrients as well. I mean, that water can hydrate the plants, you know, through times of drought. And that is really fungal. Like if you have, you want your fungal to bacterial ratio to be more fungal than bacterial usually, because that means that you've got this hyphae that I was talking about earlier, kind of like the internet of the soil, that is going to hold a lot of water in that soil. It will hold it for a very long time, and the plants can tap into that very, very well. So not only that, but in the soil microbiology, you have bacteria, fungal, protozoa. The bacteria are 17% nitrogen. Their makeup of their body is 17% nitrogen. And so what happens is, you know, they are eating a lot of the different nitrogens that are in the soil. They actually bind them for a little while and hold them in their body. But over time, when the protozoa come into the mix as well, they eat the bacteria and then they free up all of that nitrogen in plants available form for the plants to take that up and utilize that as well. So you've got the, you know, the chemical component of the soil, which I was explaining, which is that cation exchange capacity. You also have the soil pH, which is somewhat influenced by some of your cations, but it's also just, you know, how much hydrogen you have in the soil as well. And then you have also the need for porosity in your soil that creates air, right? And that porosity then allows for water. So what do we need for thriving plants and soil microbiology? We need roots in the ground to feed the microbiology. We need microbiology in the ground to feed the plants. We need porosity in the ground to allow those microbes to move and to allow the roots of the plant to move through the soil. And then we need water to fill that porosity to give life to all of those things, right? For the water to uptake and for the microbes to hold on to. And that water is also going to help flush those nutrients around in the soil, have this kind of like aqueous environment that allows the movement of, one, the microbes, but also those nutrients to shift around and become more available to the plants. And then with our cation exchange capacity, you know, we have all these different important minerals: calcium, magnesium, we've got our potassium, magnesium. We've got these ratios that are very important. So the ratio of calcium, magnesium is really important. And the ratio of our potassium to magnesium is really important for phosphorus uptake. Yes. And then we have our phosphorus sulfur ratio, and that's really important for the uptake of phosphorus as well. But sulfur is something that's really missing in the soil in this time. We've kind of become sulfur depleted, and so you have to look at all these different things. You've got phosphorus zinc ratios, potassium, sodium, iron, manganese, and so these 6 main ratios. If we look at those, we and balance them in our soil, and we can look at what that is just by a simple base saturation soil test. And so when you look at all those different combinations and you get them in the right ratios with looking at your parent material and what ratios you have of that clay, silt, and sand, then you can begin to balance all those things and make that soil work for you. It will do the work for you rather than needing to put a lot of inputs on or tillage because your soil has become too closed because you have too much magnesium in it and not enough calcium and things of that sort.
I know I wanted to go back to something you mentioned. Definitely we need cover crop to help us to make sure that our soil, our land is not bare. What do you say to the producers, and you mentioned it briefly, on if they say buying these types of things costs too much? So for cover crop, as well as your perennial seeds for forage, you know, having that as well to create a grass system, because here we're trying to transition our farmers into doing more grass-based system. And so what do you usually tell farmers when they're pushing back on the cost of buying seeds?
Well, I think one of the first things that is important to do is to do an enterprise budget on your crop with the cover crop included in that as a part of the overall thing, and really get your numbers straight. So a crop costing analysis and or a enterprise budget, they're kind of interchangeable. I would say that that's really huge in order to wrap your head around what the true numbers are for what you're doing now with the inputs you're using, and then to look at that cost comparison, not in your mind, but on paper, like really do the work and get that out there, what the hours of labor are going to be for both things and all of that. And then I think the other thing that's important to remember, and this is sometimes discouraging for people, but it's just kind of the reality. A lot of people who have made these changes have realized that there is about a 2 to 3 year time period of just letting the land adapt to this new strategy. And so ultimately, it is going to be beneficial to keep that in mind And maybe you don't make the change on your whole farm, right? You do it on a portion of the farm. You
Yes.
kind of get your feet under you, and you begin to realize how you make it work for yourself financially year after year after year. And the majority of the people who I have seen make this transition, they are following their numbers very, very specifically. They're really putting their work in to understand the numbers of their business. And in the long run, they wind up saving money. But sometimes in that first 3 years, the transition is an investment, and then it works. Then it works. The other thing that's important to remember is to take it one step further and transition into organic as well as some of these things. You can get more premium, a greater premium for your product because of that organic certification. So that's just another little, point to note. There is also a lot of different combinations of cover crop seeds that can be used, and some are more effective than others. And so really looking at the area of the country or wherever you are in the world, seeing the cover crops that have been most beneficial for people with similar soil types as you and with similar production crops is very important too. And then I would say that if you can, it's interesting because we all need to cover crop, but we don't even have enough cover crop seeds in this country to provide for Iowa to do cover cropping, like just the state of Iowa, right? So we're all going to have to become a lot more creative around how we get that cover crop seed out there if we want everybody to start using it. And so, and we need to use it efficiently, right? So that we're not just like throwing seeds out there and we don't know what's going to happen, right?
Exactly.
So I think that, yes, I think that you really just need to do your research, call NCAT, call NRCS. NRCS has a lot of information on this for each state as well. NCAT can always be of assistance in that vein as well. And then find some farmers in your area that have made the transition and work with others. I think that peer-to-peer learning is the best way to learn. And, I know that sometimes when making this transition, there are social dynamics that that come into play. And so some people they're scared to make that change because it's going to make them maybe stand out in their community in a way that they don't necessarily welcome in that moment. And so finding somebody who can be an ally is very important, I think. And I would say that those are just a few of the things to think about. But ultimately, there's a million stories out there of people who have found success with cover crops, and there's some that have failed as well. And that's agriculture in general.
It is.
And so just because you have one bad experience with cover crops, don't let that be the end all be all of it, because in the research that we've been doing down here in the Rio Grande Valley with the University of Texas, we have had great successes, and we've had some just lack of benefit in some scenarios. And so we're trying to do some of that work for our producers to figure out what really works. But like I said, you learn as you go. Everybody who I know who's using cover crops, it's like they just get better at it over time. I've never heard of anybody saying that they got worse at it.
Exactly.
Eventually it worked.
It does. It does. And thank you for sharing the longevity and long term of utilizing cover crops, because sometimes we have farmers think it's going to turn over the next season, as if it's a vegetable crop type thing. And it's like, no, it doesn't do it that fast. One of the things I wanted to share with two comments. One is selecting your seeds. I know that some of our farmers utilize their local co-op to purchase their co-op seed. Their cover crop seeds. And sometimes they want a cover crop mix, like the farmer have done that research and really want to create a cover crop mix. And sometimes you go to the co-op and you have to buy, 50 pounds for 25. You only need 25 or 20 pounds. And so I wanted to just tell farmers, do your research. It is seed companies out here that will break your cover crop mix down for your acreage. So all you have to tell them is how many acres you want to seed, and then they break it down for you, or you can have that information for them, and then they send you exactly what you need. So, if it's only 5 pounds per acre and, you got a couple of acres, they're sending you exactly what you need. One, that helps with your costs. Most of us do not want to pay more than what we actually need. We don't want to pay for more. And so it definitely helps with that, but we don't want to waste seeds. Like Kara was talking about, you just don't want to be just throwing seeds out. You want benefit.
Yeah.
You want it to touch the soil so it will come up. So just wanted to share that. Second thing, I have utilized the native grasses with the cover crop mix or a perennial grass mix for my animals. And I raise sheep. And so I did basically the research that will give the sheep the most nutrients. So I would utilize a cover crop. So I will pull up that cover crop list that most anyone can find online, and then go through it, knowing the percentage that sheep need, the different variables, and then find the cover crop to match. And so if it says, X amount of percentage of protein and you do X percentage for energy, then you just go over to your cover crop chart and find the things that's conducive for your area. So I have to repeat that. Cover crop that's conducive for your area, because all of it is not. Some cannot grow in the South when it's hot as it is now and with our humidity. And so you want to definitely get something that's conducive for your area. So wanted to share that with everyone. Kara said it, doing the research. You have to do the research for your cover crop, as well as if you're doing perennial grass mixes for livestock. But doing that research first, then you definitely could be purchasing what you need and stuff. So I just definitely want to share that with everyone. And Kara, we don't have any questions from anyone. Do anyone want to open it up to ask questions on your own? I can unmute everyone because we got basically like 7 minutes left. And so I want to definitely allow people to ask questions if you want to ask questions on your own versus typing them in the chat. We'll give a few seconds for that if you want to come in and ask a particular question. And everyone is unmuted at this time.
Anybody out there?
I know. I
can make one more point.
Yes, please do. Go ahead.
So with regard to the cover crop seed, some folks will do a little natural inoculation that they make to help get some of their microbes in with that seed when it's put down. And so they might do a combination of some type of compost extract. You can take compost and you literally, put some water in it. You can make a slurry. You can add a little fish emulsion and some molasses or things like that. And it doesn't take a lot. I mean, we're talking a pretty small amount for a large batch of seeds that could cover, acres and acres. And sometimes using that particular inoculant, you put it on the seed, and there's different ways to do it for different types of seed. But that's another thing that the For the Love of Soil book has in it, the Nicole Masters book. And then when that seed goes into the ground, if you don't have a lot of microbiology in your soil already, that's going to help just introduce some of the more native microbiology, right? Because if you've made that compost on your property, and that means that the native microbes that inhabit your soil there are in that, and those are the ones that are going to survive the most. We can buy seed inoculant, but we don't know the viability of some of those things. And so sometimes making your own with these compost extracts with a little bit of fuel in there, like the fish emulsion and molasses, can make that seed become more viable and increase the sprouting rate of the cover crop.
Yes. Wow, thank you for that. Anything that we could do to cut the costs, because
Yes.
a lot of the farmers are composting. So thank you for that, and definitely pick up the book. I got to pull that book because it seemed like it has some very nice tidbits in there that can assist us. Thank you. So I want to open it up again to questions. I think I saw maybe one person come off of mute. Please, you can ask your question at this time. I guess not. Well, we definitely appreciate everyone for joining us. I want to give Kara's email address again. So it's karak@ncat.org. karak@ncat.org. So if you have any questions, please refer to her with the soil questions. And as you heard, her bio is very extensive. So I'm assuming she probably can answer other questions for you if you have them under her expertise. But we definitely just have enjoyed everyone joining us, and please take a look at our YouTube channel. That's where the other weekly Wednesday workshop videos are. And it is under a playlist, so you can find it under the weekly Wednesday workshop. We appreciate everyone joining us, and we will be doing these weekly. And next week, we're trying to now add some farmers in the mix. So briefly to share with you, the purpose of starting these workshops were to help farmers pivot during this crisis. So we definitely wanted to assist farmers in learning new operations, and also explaining those operations, getting in depth for that, so they can understand how to pivot during the crisis so they don't lose so many resources. And so that's the purpose of these workshops. And then we want to start asking some of the farmers. So our guests today, if you have farmers that have just knocked it out of the park, like they were farming, but then they have leveled up and taken it to the next level during the crisis, please share that with me. I would love to interview them. My email address is Felicia, FELICIA, B as in boy, @ncat.org. So we would love to be able to have that person on and interview them as well. So Kara, I think okay, that was Mike saying great job. So I thought we had a question, but I thank you so much for your time today. I know you're very busy, and we just appreciate you sharing your expertise. And always, if you want to come back, just let me know, because again, these are weekly. So whenever you want to come back, we greatly appreciate it, because we want to share. We definitely want to let everyone know what NCAT has to offer. And sometimes we don't know. We just don't know. We help the nation with our services, and they briefly can sometimes find out what we do, but a lot of times they don't know all our expertise. So thank you so much today for joining us.
Well, thank you for inviting me. This was really fun, and I really hope that some people will reach out with questions. I'm always glad to help people, and no matter how busy we are here to help you. So
Exactly.
that is our number one goal, and I look forward to hearing from some of you. So thanks again, Felicia, for inviting me.
So can you share the Soil Water Initiative website again?
Yeah, it's soilforwater.org, and just straight up the name, soilforwater.org. And we've got some good information up there. We're expanding our project. We are going to be moving into New Mexico, Colorado, and California. It's just been
Wow.
Texas for the most part, but we are moving out and moving up. So more soil health.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, and thanks everyone for joining us today. Thanks, Kara.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.